You're now listening to the Something Good Podcast Network. Please press any key to continue.
A kiss, as defined by Dan Webster, is something pleasing, a caress, a gentle touch. But there's another kiss that isn't in Webster's.
Hey world, we're kids!
Some critics say they don't make music, they just make noise.
Yeah, Kiss sucks!
Kiss implies the extreme in the theatrics on stage, utilizing fire and smoke and bizarre costumes, and the ever-consistent, constant concealment of their true identities.
Speaking of which, Kiss is going to have its own comic book soon.
Take Kiss with you. It's fun. Show your friends and be the first. Now.
Oh my God, no time to turn!
And welcome once again to No Time to Turn, a Kiss nerd podcast where we embrace our inner Kiss nerd. It's the rock and roll equivalent of Trekkies.
It really are.
Yeah.
I think Kiss is the one band that kind of has that Trekkie cult following, at least more than any other band, I think.
I'm Russ Ward. I am, I guess for lack of a better term, I'm the host, joined by my co-hosts from the Something Good For You podcast, Alex Stiff and Cap Nunn.
Hello, everybody.
Back.
And we are going on a little journey, charting the history of Kiss, album by album, year by year. And hopefully you caught our introduction show, kind of introduced to who we were and our own personal histories somewhat.
Yeah, and get a little vibe of our personalities and where we stand as Kiss fans and where we came from.
Kiss nerds.
Yes.
Is that going to be one of the self-imposed rules? So, like in Walking Dead, they don't say zombies, and in the WWE, they don't say wrestler.
Not wrestling.
I don't know.
So it's like, are we not going to say fan? Is it? Or do we only want to refer to it as Kiss nerds?
I think of Kiss fans as like fair weather fans that know, like, you know, the high spot songs, the Rock and Roll Over, Detroit Rock City, or whatever. Kiss nerds, that's a whole nother thing.
They know the 80s material.
We are the nerds.
Like, we are the nerds. We know too much about this damn band.
Probably. No, we don't claim to be experts. We don't know everything, honestly. We're just big fans. And as if you listen to the introduction episode, I've been into this since I was a small child in the mid-'70s. Alex came aboard in the mid-'90s, I guess.
Late 90s.
Late 90s.
Probably, yeah.
And Cap sort of came in
mid-2000s.
Somewhere.
Yeah, early to mid-2000s. I was a late bloomer.
Yeah, so we're all from different eras with different perspectives and different opinions.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And we'll gauge all that as we advance, and we're going to just start in now with the debut Kiss album.
Yes, self-titled.
And we're probably warrant to do a little back history on it. A little bit of where they were and how they got here.
I was going to say, it probably needs to start with in 1970 then, doesn't it? Or even before that.
Well, you could, I mean, if we wanted to gauge kind of the whole, you know, I'm gonna use some $3 words here. I'm gonna drop my big $3 words. If you want to discuss the cultural zeitgeist stuff. No, but you know, you're coming out of the 60s. It's sort of post hippie. You kind of see the rise of what was called glitter rock in America. I guess they call it glam in Britain.
Right.
Glam has a different connotation in America because you think of 80s hair bands.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, you know, coming into this somewhat new thing or whole new thing is the guys that are going to form Kiss. But it's interesting to look at where they were coming from because they all had been participating in other groups. Most famously,
Wicked Lester.
Wicked Lester. Everyone knows Kiss had the band Wicked Lester. They recorded an unreleased album. Peter was in a band called Chelsea, not to be confused with the British punk band of the same name.
Right.
That did release an album. Ace had been in a variety of different acts, and just recently the quote-unquote lost recordings of his band Molimo? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, I believe so. That sounds right.
I've always wondered how that was pronounced. The name had been in circles for years. He'd played in this band, and then it pops up. And what's interesting to me is how different all these bands are. Not necessarily to each other, but how it differs to what became Kiss.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it gives no real hint of where they're going to go as Kiss.
Mm-hmm. The only obvious one really is Wicked Lester, only because they used material from those sessions and future Kiss records.
Yeah, but they're completely redone. If you listen to, like with Ace's group, it sounded very much like Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah.
Seems like a very big influence. Peter's group was almost like a country rock kind of thing.
Kind of like because that was the thing at the time, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of that.
Very California.
Well, it's that post-hippie thing, and the same with Wicked Lester, which kind of has something of a. I don't think it's fair to say a Jethro Tull vibe, but they just
only because it has the flute
and stuff. But and apparently there's 2 different mixes of the Wicked Lester recordings with, I think, 2 different guitar players.
Interesting. What was the name of the guy that was on the first record? I just watched a doc with him on it, on the Wicked Lester album.
Stephen Cornell.
Yes. That's what it was.
Yeah, and he was the guy that introduced Gene to Paul, or Paul to Gene,
and famously, at least according to both Gene and Paul, they did
not
get
like
along.
each other. Yeah, and so it's interesting that this union formed at all, and it's interesting to see how they were kind of following what any path they thought would lead to quote unquote success.
Right. That was kind of their one common thread, was like they're going to work hard to get to what they want.
And it seemed like they were following kind of what they thought to be conventional wisdom of the time. And at some point they make this hard left turn.
Yeah.
And,
that conventional wisdom being what?
With Wicked Lester is more, it sounds a lot more commercial as far as,
for the times.
Yeah,
almost kind
polish
of
those
wider
demos up
appeal.
A little more. Yeah, it could totally hit the stations.
Once they made a left turn into, they're going to be a quote unquote hard rock band.
Right.
That was not necessarily always a commercially viable proposition.
Right, because this was like
this is before they obviously had to have made that decision before they thought of it being theatrical.
Mm-hmm. Oh no,
I'm sure that those very rapidly, but
hard rock was just becoming a thing too, like with the Led Zeppelins of the world and things like that.
Yeah, I think they were probably taking their cues more from like Humble Pie.
Right.
Yeah, they've mentioned that in Sweet.
And Slade.
Mm-hmm, Slade.
Slade seems to be the most highly influential, but I mean, I don't know to what degree. It might be a coincidence that they're so similar.
I think it played at least a huge role with Paul. Even down to the way, he announces and, speaks to the audience. And he even tried the top hat for a minute.
Yeah, I don't.
There was some shows, I think, on the Yeah, there was a.
Well, that's later on. That's way later.
Yeah, but I would still say that would still be a callback.
Maybe it could also come from T-Rex.
That could also be true.
Mark Bolan was probably a big influence on more so British rock than American. He didn't have the impact in America that he had in Europe.
I think that's the interesting thing about
those
Kiss
guys they were hip to it.
I was going to say Kiss was very influenced by a lot of British rock at that time.
There's no way they weren't. And, the Dolls were doing the same thing too, dressing up like the members of, another band I love from that era, Mott the Hoople.
Yeah. Well, I think Mott the Hoople kind of steered themselves into a glam thing after a moment. I'm not as familiar with their history, but all that was feeding into the American kind of consciousness slowly. It wasn't as probably as successful in America as it had been in Europe, but there was obviously bands picking up, taking their cues from it, most obviously the New York Dolls. But there was in New York in that era, that wasn't just the Dolls. There was a little scene that had evolved with bands like the Harlots of 42nd Street and the Brats.
Yeah.
Kiss actually did a few shows with the Brats.
They did shows with the Brats.
Before,
there was a band called Luger that had Ivan Krall, who was later in the Patti Smith group. some of the guys from that would be in the Ramones. Tommy Ramone was in a band called Butch. Mm-hmm. I think there was a band called The Fast.
Was that the one that does Boys Will Be Boys?
I don't know. I'm not.
I think I remember that though.
We're educated on Kiss.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of going off of names that I know, and then some of these bands I have heard. I think there's some surviving recordings of the Harlots, and a big group in New York in the time was Eric Emerson and the Magic Tramps, who I have to confess I've never heard any of their stuff. That's the first time
yeah, me too.
And they were pretty influential in there, and for a minute, and they were kind of the big band in New York, And then conversely, though, there was other bands that were kind of either peaking or just starting, which would be like Mountain.
Yeah,
Leslie West, I'm sure was, I know was a big influence on a lot of some of the stuff that Kiss was doing early on,
especially guitar sounds, but they weren't glam by any means.
No, not at all. That's what I'm saying. It's kind of the antithesis to the New York kind of glitter rock thing that was going on. You had Mountain, and then Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah,
I think that was more of a. I might be wrong, but it seems like I think it was more of a Long Island thing. Early Twisted Sister was kind of being influenced by that, but I don't think they were. I think this is still a little early in the game.
Yeah,
the Dictators came up. And
I was about to ask about them.
They were going to have their. I can't remember what year their first album comes out. I think it's not until 75. So Kiss probably still beat them to the punch, but they were just getting started probably in the same sort of era.
About Jane County and
Jane County and the Electric Chairs were doing their thing at the same time. There's an early incarnation. I guess it was Kiss once they got the four locked into place. One of their earliest shows was at a loft on Bleecker Street on the Lower East Side with Wayne County, and everybody was there. That's where all. I think that's where everyone got their first taste of Kiss, because they were somewhat outside of that Mercer Arts thing that the Dolls were doing,
right?
Max's and Mercer's, but they were still all playing the Coventry over in Queens, which was a club in Queens that these bands were playing. I don't think Kiss were doing as well as some of these other bands were at Coventry, and I think it seems like it was pretty adversarial. And to a certain extent, because Kiss were kind of outside the cool scene or whatever.
You wind up hearing them talking about renting out the Diplomat a lot.
Yeah, well, they weren't the only ones. They always make it sound like that was their idea. There are other bands that were doing that too. But like that,
their problem was they couldn't fit into any scene with their whole.
They kind of did. They were trying to. They just were taking it. They were less androgynous. I think they flirted with that ever so briefly. There's photographs that show that.
Definitely did.
But they immediately went into the much more, for lack of a better term, butch.
Right.
Black leather.
Peter's gone to say, he's like, when we tried the glam thing for a few shows, he's like, it looked like bulldogs and tutus.
Yeah.
Because these were big dudes.
Yeah, and that was one thing that also kind of set them aside. They looked a lot more butch than a lot of these smaller, wiry, androgynous guys. And so, they were developing their own kind of unique persona, and it was influenced by the glitter rock thing, but they were taking it to a whole nother level. Probably, also, and cannot be understated, the influence of Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
The theatrics of Alice Cooper, and with sort of the more of a anglicized, British rock kind of hard rock sound,
right?
And the presentation was, again, even Alice still had something of a I don't know how you would describe it other than before he kind of got into the horror rock kind of thing. It was still kind of a quasi-gay, fey kind of a thing. There's still kind of
like an androgynous thing to it.
And, and all of that was all to put outrage and shock into the element.
That poster Jeff Clayton has where Alice is kind of looks like he's wrapped up in plastic wrap or...
That's early on. They were doing, again, the androgyny was kind of... He's holding the daisy over his head.
Yeah.
That's kind of the atmosphere they're kind of moving into, but that's still very much a New York thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people thought this was going to take over the United States the way it had in England, and it didn't. You know, the Dolls were probably the first one to get signed. Yeah. And, you know, once they got outside of New York City, it was a very uphill battle.
Wasn't there a scene that called on in L.A. too, or is that later on for glam and glitter and things like that?
I mean, there was probably it was underground. It was kind of a permeating under the surface everywhere, I would imagine, to a certain extent, but more so in the areas like L.A. or New York or Chicago that were kind of more media,
right? You
know, media centers.
Gotcha.
But it seemed like New York is what produced the largest kind of effort at it. But none of these bands got signed and didn't really carry over. But a lot of these bands, I think it's important to note, sort of also were at the advent of what became punk rock. And I think that proves especially true. You talk about in L.A., especially in L.A., I think a lot of the early punk scene was like Glam Damaged Kids.
Mm-hmm. Detroit, places like that too.
I don't think Detroit ever really picked up on that.
You don't think so?
Detroit was always very much more,
butch.
Yeah, very earthy. You know.
It get kind of glammed up a little bit.
I mean, I think that, like I said, I think it ended up that kind of
came afterwards. Probably.
I mean, there was a point where Todd Rundgren, had a kind of a glammy look, but he never really played a glam rock style.
No.
But you saw that there was a certain element of glitter or whatever you want to call it that eventually it kind of became part of a generalized look, a rock and roll look. I mean, there's even a point where Mick Jagger had glitter on his face or whatever. So yeah, I mean, the influence was there, but as far as really permeating in America, where a band really crossed over and made a giant stride in that, I don't think, even Bowie in his earliest efforts did not connect. It wasn't until he flipped and did the kind of Young Americans album, which was more of a R&B influence, that he started connecting commercially in America.
So Kiss was, I guess Alice Cooper, like you said, it was androgynous. So Kiss was really the first one to, get an audience, with makeup.
Alice, when he went more towards the horror rock thing. Alice in '73 was arguably the Alice Cooper band was the biggest band in the world.
Yeah,
and then, to me, that's the Alice group. He wasn't yet a solo thing. It was Alice Cooper was the name of the band, and Alice being one and the same. So
yeah,
but yeah, that was very, very, very big in '73. So like I said, you can't be understated how much of an influence that had on Kiss. But musically, I don't think you could really compare Alice Cooper to Kiss.
No, it's two different flavors.
Psycho Circus.
Well, you know what I'm saying? Well, not until, so later, Alice, when they all got homogenized into shitty hair metal. But,
but yeah, no, I think and it's kind of interesting too. Kiss as a whole never really mentions Alice Cooper as an influence. The only member I can really think of off the top of my head to mention Alice Cooper is Peter. It feels like Peter's the one that said, like, we saw Alice Cooper and we wanted to make a band with 4 of them.
Yeah, they saw him. I know they went to see him in what was probably that '73 tour, the $1 Billion Babies. And, I'm sure that made a big impact. But to what degree? I mean, I don't know at what point that they already had the idea that they were going to be a theatrical kind of group. It seemed like they already, those wheels had already started turning. They were already probably experimenting with makeup, but it helped refine their image a little bit, I'm sure. And that was still in the process of refinement.
Yeah,
that's one of the things the Kiss mythology seems to suggest they were born fully formed, right out of the box, ready to go.
Oh no, even the makeup had to change.
You could see a lot of you could see a lot of the evolution as to what was, trial and error and what they were trying to attempt. But I think, obviously by the time they had the first album out, though, they clearly had it basically in play. They knew where they were, it was now
except Peter, but
well, that was only that one album.
Exactly,
shot.
but that still makes me laugh.
We can talk a little bit about that, but before they make the first album, and I don't have the date. You could pull this up. They did the recording at Electric Lady.
Yep. It was completed on March 13th, 73.
So think about that. That's March of 73, spring of 73. This is around the same time they played that Loft show. Mm-hmm. They were owed some time from doing session work.
Right.
And their manager at the time was a guy named Lou Lynette, and he arranged for the time to be paid out in studio time as opposed to money.
Right.
And by happenstance, Eddie Kramer was the house engineer at Electric Lady, so he wound up being the producer of this thing.
That was the story I've heard, was that somebody from Wicked Lester had to hook them up with Eddie Kramer.
I've got a quote here. It says, it was a result of Eddie's work on this demo that Neil Bogart offered him a job producing Kiss Alive, and he recalled it was done as a favor because their producer, Ron Johnson, was working Electric Lady at the time, and I think eventually became the manager of the studio for a while. He approached me because Kiss's previous band, Wicked Lester, was a soft, folky thing, and Gene had this concept of the Kiss band. I remember seeing drawings of the various characters they all had planned out, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so it seems like it was a connection from Ron Johnson.
Ron Johnson was the producer for the Wicked Lester album.
Yeah.
And it would not be fair to call him a manager, but I think he was, that was the connection. Mm-hmm. And they were owed the time. And I think he was probably the one helping get, supply them with session work.
Right. But weren't Paul and Gene very vocal or very adamant about getting Eddie Kramer and nobody else?
That's the way they say it, but I don't think that's the way it happened. I think they got it because, like I said, Eddie Kramer was the house engineer there.
Okay. Because I've heard them talk about we demand this guy.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think they could have any clout to demand anything. The question I have is, what's curious about the whole Wicked Lester thing is they were signed, I guess, to CBS, and they walked away. Famously, they said, "Well, we didn't, it didn't live up to our expectations, and we walked away from the deal."
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, I don't know how you walk away from a record deal because they get an advance. They're obviously somebody owes somebody some money, to recoup that advance.
It was the guitar player, whatever his name was.
I don't know. I don't know what the story is. That's one of the curiosities to me. Is like they had to have bought themselves out of that at some level,
but they're not going
to be able to walk away from it. I know they ended up buying those recordings about 6 or 8 years later when Kiss really peaked in the late 70s to prevent those recordings from coming out. So I don't know if that was, obviously those recordings belonged to CBS until Kiss purchased them, but I don't
already
know.
Had a nest egg ready.
I don't know how that works. I don't, the deal could have been, maybe they didn't get it in advance. I don't know how that worked, but obviously they walked out of that. They were able to get free of it for whatever reason, and they record the demo with Eddie Kramer. What songs exactly are all on that?
I can pull that up. I've got it pulled up in a separate tab, but I've actually got a really piece of cool information kind of connecting everything you were talking about. And it really just puts it all within context. So this was completed on March 13th of 73. The final Wicked Lester showcase was November of 72.
Right, so that's a pretty rapid turnaround.
Yeah, it's because it says right here, the band was only 2 months old when they recorded those Eddie Kramer demos.
Yeah.
On those demos, get that pulled up right over here, we've got Deuce, we've got Strutter, Cold Gin, Watching You, and Black Diamond.
And if you listen to these recordings, they have these, there's like, compared to what becomes the album recordings, there's like extended passages between the verse and or from a chorus to another verse.
Strutter in particular.
Yeah, they're a lot longer and a little more jammy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's almost like in some of it almost feels like they don't really have it together.
The guitar solo is completely different.
There's a mistake in one of them that's really obvious. I can't remember which one. You can hear it.
I think it's Watching You. I think it's one of the notes they hold on the everybody else is here.
I can't remember. It might be more than one, but you can tell it's being put together quickly and cheaply. But it's still, they're surprisingly strong. I mean, you can hear that the the idea is there, and
just needs to be refined just a little bit.
Yeah, and
here's a little bit of studio
info. And I think that the demos almost they have a little more oomph, power, and speed than the studio versions.
And I think the reason being is even the way they recorded it. It said they recorded in Studio B with the old-fashioned way, 4-track. And the engineer, Dave Whitman, said, look, you're going to help engineer this. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way. We're going to do it 4-track and go 2 to 4 to 4. So, or 4 to 2 to 4 rather. And that's what we did. Those demos were amazing. I still have a copy of them today. So essentially what that meant was they recorded everything in 4-track, bounced it down to 2, saved that tape, recorded an additional 4-track while playing it on the back end. And those were the overdubs.
Yeah, that's how they would, they bounce tracks.
Mm-hmm. I think that's part of the reason. Because they probably were touching the Reds a little bit and it had a little bit more oomph and it kind of gave them a little bit more aggression and dangerousness.
Well, they're also, you can tell by some of the stuff they're doing, obviously they're aware of what it is they're trying to do and what the purpose of these tapes are, but you can also hear that they're a lot less probably self-conscious than what they'd be later on. There's the kind of playfulness at the end of Firehouse where they just mimic the fire engine, with and one of them goes honk honk, and there's a point at the beginning of one where they kind of launch into the song and they stop and they recount it and go again. It's all you if all you had at that point was that demo without the visual to it, it's still a solid hard rock band.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think this is important to note because so many people get hung up on the visuals, as Paul Stanley has famously said, they listen with their eyes. And, that was a very beneficial thing, but musically, Kiss were coming together as a pretty adept hard rock band. They weren't doing like what so many of these other New York bands were, which was very Stonesy derivative.
Exactly.
They were, a lot of these bands kind of boogied. As great as the Dolls are, they were not, you can't really correlate musically the Dolls to Kiss.
No.
Outside of it being guitar-based hard rock.
Yeah. Androgynous type singer, maybe.
Well, the Dolls were, I don't know. The Dolls were, you can see that Stones dynamic with David Johansen and Johnny Thunders as, Mick and Keith. But they were just much more of a kind of a they were the party band and they were the it was exciting and it was energetic and it was the New York Dolls are great. You can't sit here and say, oh, they sucked compared to Kiss, because that's just not true. They weren't Kiss and Kiss weren't the Dolls. And, in a lot of ways they complemented each other, probably in ways that neither of them would care to acknowledge or admit. In a way, Kiss were like the shadow side of the Dolls. The Dolls were very, technicolor, flamboyant. They had that androgynous, kind of thing.
And Kiss
was just black and silver and white and
leather.
And they, whereas the Dolls had more of a bounce and it was danceable and it was
the band the girls would go see. The Kiss was the band the boys would go see.
Probably very much, yeah. It's kind of like Kiss was a lot more direct. It was and so you can see where there was going to be a contrast to the point of a competition, and Kiss were not necessarily as readily welcomed into that New York scene, and I don't think they really cared about it. And armed with their demo, they had a kind of a little bit of a lead. Obviously the Dolls had their record deal and were already off into their own orbit, but
where does Neil Bogart come into the picture?
Well, the whole thing kind of hinges on these shows they play. Like we were talking about the Loft show in early '73, which would have been around the same time they did the demo. So that was kind of what those arrangements, I'm sure, are what people saw.
Right.
And I know they made an impression, most famously Rick Rivets, who had been in, I think he was in the Brats, you know, I think they played with that night, and they were like, you know, these guys are better than we are, you know, and that probably added to the jealousy of it. And I want to say I've read there, Gail Papalardi, who was Felix Papalardi's wife from Mountain.
Is this the Gail Papalardi that killed Felix at the
would
end?
later kill Felix. But I think she was at this show because I want to say that Felix Papalardi came to the famous Diplomat show that Bill Aucoin saw.
I was about to ask that too. Yeah,
now this is, you know, in the lineage, they do the show the summer of '73, and Bill Aucoin and Sean Delaney, and I want to say, can't remember if Joyce Biowitz went with them or not. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. She ended up marrying Neil Bogart, but that was later. Bill and Joyce had what they called Direction Plus, I think is what it was called, was a management company they were starting, which would become Rocksteady. And Neil Bogart had been involved in television production, which is kind of important to think, you know, he's seeing Kiss on another level.
He's seeing it from the theatrical side.
He's seeing it from a visual side, saying this, you know, and knowing that television is going to be an important part in promotion
Bill
coming
too, right?
into the future.
Bill was involved with the TV production
That's what
too,
I'm talking
right?
about.
Oh, okay, I thought you said Neil.
Oh, did I say Neil? I might have. I'm sorry. I'm trying to think 3 steps ahead of myself here.
Right.
So Bill Aucoin has seen this and signs, you know, offers them a management deal, but it's a very short term kind of thing. He's saying, I think it was like a 6-week contract, and
basically saying like, if I can't get you a record deal,
if I can't get you the record deal, then we'll just call it even. Yeah. But he already had a working relationship with Neil Bogart and knew that Neil Bogart was leaving Kama Sutra Records, I think is where he was at, which was, I don't know who they were a subsidiary of or whatever. He was launching
here.
Yeah, I was going to say they might have been with Warner's because he was starting Casablanca, which was also going to be a subsidiary for Warner. And so that was already kind of in play. There's another story saying that, you know, Neil had worked with Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise, who had produced probably their biggest success was the group Stories at that point. That did the song Brother Louie.
Right.
They produced that, and I think they did, I don't know if they did Midnight Train to Georgia or not. They did, it was Gladys Knight. They were, you know, but they had a little bit of success. Richie Wise was also playing in a band called Dust.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, featuring one Marky Ramone.
Well, Mark Bell at the time.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And so, you know, they zeroed in on that Kiss demo and were like, this is where we need to go. So I don't know exactly how all that folds together, if it just sort of all happened simultaneously as a, you know,
that's how the industry works.
Perfect storm of events. But obviously they got signed as the first act signed to Casablanca, and they were signed, though, primarily on the strength of their music.
Yep.
Because Neil Bogart had not yet seen this theatrics that they were going to do.
Nope, they had only heard the demo. And so just on the strength of the music alone, they saw the potential and were going in with, you know, with that as
their pitch.
As their pitch. So,
and like, I think it wasn't until like after they recorded the record and like they were going to do a showcase or something that like Neil finally saw.
No, they did a showcase
thing
first.
It was a launch party for Casablanca, wasn't it?
They did a showcase before Casablanca. They did a. Now, you know, I need to have this in front of me.
I've got the it says Casablanca's held a party at Century Plaza Hotel.
That was after the album. They did in some sort of small place rehearsal room. I think I'm conflating 2 different events. There's the famous story where I think this was the first time Neil Bogart saw him, and they did it in this room, and they played like 30 minutes, and they were a small room according to legend.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about now.
And when they got done, you know, he was just completely shell shocked. and just didn't know how to react. And Gene walked over to him and grabbed his arms and made him physically clap his hands together. And that's when Sean Delaney kind of pricked up and was like, these guys are going to make it.
Yeah.
But I want to say they did something with, I don't know if this is right or not.
Go ahead. I'll let you know.
I'm not sure if they did a similar thing where they did a thing with, I want to say it was Mo Austin from Warner's who came and saw it and didn't see anything in it and just was like, no. And I think that was in a similar situation.
I want to say there was this thing where it's like a half a song in, someone left and like they stuck around. So that sounds about right.
But all this was moving towards, anyway, I guess it's kind of moved, but they got the deal with Casablanca and recorded the first album in, I guess, October of 73.
Recorded in the Bell Sound Studios, October through November of 74.
Yep.
No, it would have had to been 73. The album comes out in 74.
Well, it was...
oh, yeah, it might have been 73. That's probably it.
So yeah, you're looking at the April 24 Kissin' Time re-record. They re-recorded Kissin' Time in April.
So they recorded the album in October of 73. Now think of the timeline here. In October of 72, I don't even think... I mean, they were still doing Wicked Lester.
Mm-hmm.
And just in that year, they've gone through getting out of the Wicked Lester deal, starting over, finding first Peter and then Ace, and then recording the demo, playing these, and only a handful of shows.
Yeah.
And
getting
to the point to where they got the record deal. And again, the only group that had a record deal in New York City was the Dolls.
Yeah.
But the Dolls probably had more of the primo deal because they were on a more respected label with Mercury. But
got Todd Rundgren to produce the record and all that.
Rundgren to produce the record. And I think all eyes were on the Dolls.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone had any, wouldn't have put their money on Kiss at that point.
Here's actually a really interesting little tidbit since we want to talk about just how lightning fast they shot out of the gate after that record. Immediately after the record, they started their first album tour in Edmonton on February 5th, 74. A few weeks later, they made their first TV national appearance in ABC's In Concert, aired March 29th. And then they did the Mike Douglas show March 29th.
Well, go back a little bit.
Yeah,
At
also
what point?
aired the
So
same
they started,
day.
Okay, I knew the first... before we get to the tour, let's talk about the record.
Yeah, I was just throwing that as just a little side note since you were talking about just how quick.
So the record's recorded in October of 73.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about that. They, like I said, they had Kenny Kerner and Richie Wise.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And from the way I've understood it, the dynamic between Kerner and Wise was Kerner was more of the guy that coaxed the performances, while Richie Wise was more the guy that caught it on tape, was twiddling the knobs,
right?
And pushing the faders, and Kenny Kerner kind of takes credit for taking those demos where we talked about the extended parts and stuff and tightening them all up,
right?
Saying chop that out,
just trying to keep Kiss from becoming a jam band.
And I don't think they were ever going to become a jam band, but taking those extended passages out of songs, tighten everything up to be shorter, tighter, more direct,
pitching singles,
and
if you will.
Well, yeah, I don't know how that was decided, I guess, but so let's go look at the album though, track by track.
All right, let's do that. So it kicks off the record with probably one of the more popular. It's a weird one to say popular deep cut.
Because you don't hear it on the radio. We're talking about Strutter, of course.
Yeah, Strutter.
Strutter is, it was a part of their live show for years and years and years and years and years.
Mm-hmm. But it's not like on a lot of compilation records, it seems like. Yeah. It's not like a radio
No, it's
staple.
not played around on radio a whole lot.
Writers Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons.
How many songs in the Kiss catalog have the Simmons-Stanley co-write? Not many. And a lot of times you'll find these guys kind of arguing over as to who was more
involved.
So that's kind of an interesting co-write credit because there's not a lot of those.
No, and actually I've got all the writer credits at least with this release, and I'll make sure and have that for future releases since now we're bringing it up. Great, we're applying rules to ourselves on the fly.
Strutter's one of the very obvious ones that they really tightened up from the demo.
Right.
Yeah.
Is a lot longer as on the demo version. It had like I said, the extended passages between the chorus and the verse, the second verse. There's a lot more, like I said,
Solos completely different.
I hate saying the word jam because you get a certain connotation.
I know what
but
you
it's
mean,
a lot. It seems a lot looser on the demo.
Here we go. Getting rid of the last little bit of Wicked Lester DNA and habits. That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, you know what? That might be true. That's probably had something to do with it.
Yeah, so if we don't really want to say jam, we'll just say it's the last gasp of them trying to get rid of the Wicked Lester sound.
Can you name?
I was gonna say, where does Strutter land with you guys?
Oh,
I'll ask that with each song.
okay. It's easily in my top 3 on the album, and it's one of their best tunes. I've played it to death.
We're a little biased.
We're a little biased. I've played it to death. I've listened to it to death. It still sticks with me. I still like the song. I mean, and those guitar solos that Ace puts on it are still timeless to me.
Yeah,
I think it's lyrically it's more in sync with that New York glam glitter vibe. It sounds like it's written to be stylized in that kind of a way. I don't think musically it comes off quite that way. I think maybe that was where he was going with it, but once it got interpreted by the band, but it's got more of that swagger than some of the more punchier direct stuff of like Cold Gin or Deuce. It's a lot, so it's closer to a Dolls vibe,
right?
In a sense, I don't think it reaches that level at all, but I think you can see it's trying to lean that way.
A lot more bounce to it.
But the group has bucked it into being their own thing.
Same thing with the next track, Nothing to Lose.
Yeah, Nothing to Lose is probably one of my least favorite Kiss songs.
Really?
I don't think I've ever cared for that song.
Really?
Yeah.
I love the riff. The lyrics are just goofy as shit, but
yeah, I'd say, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it being goofy lyrics or whatever. To me, it's interesting. I don't think it sounds like a quintessential Kiss song. I don't think it has that same kind of writing style or anything about it. It sounds like an anomaly on that record to me compared to everything else. The only thing, the worst, we'll get to the most anomalous track on the record in a minute, but it doesn't seem to fit the same vibe. It doesn't seem to be of the same mold as far as the writing style. And I know it's become
like
a
more
signature
traditional
song.
music sounding almost.
Well, it's kind of got that kind of
doo-wop almost.
The early 70s kind of bar rock
it's a little,
thing.
Yeah, it's a little bar. It's a little boogie. I don't know, but the kind of they brought into and later when they play it live, they had the call and response kind of thing, with Peter, which I think would have worked way better on the recording if they had done it. And Peter's whole vocal on it is the best part about it. Yeah,
it really is. But
I think that's what sets the song off. That keeps it from just being a complete dud, in my opinion. That's just me. It's not one of my favorite songs of theirs.
Yeah. For me, not my favorite on the record, but I love the song because of Alive and other versions I've heard of it. So I really like Nothing to Lose, and I think I'm in that same camp as Cap. I dig the riff. The riff pulls me in every time.
And there's cowbell in it.
You gotta love some cowbell.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of cowbell in early Kiss.
And now I get to be Russ for a minute and say Firehouse is probably in my bottom 3, if not. Yeah, it's in my bottom 3 least favorites on the record. Live, it's still even a little bit of a slog to get through, but I don't know. On the record, it just
feels like a
it's a lot slower than the demo version. The demo version has a lot more forward drive to it. I don't know why they slowed this tempos down. I don't know whose idea that was. I would assume that's a Kerner and Wise decision.
I do know that it was their decision to not really want to touch the red. Paul's talked numerous times about how the one thing he personally doesn't really enjoy about the record is they were dealing with producers that were used to dealing with like contemporary style singer-songwriter artists, and those type recording guys know they don't want any distortion. Well, you don't want to peak it at all.
Here's why I would disagree with that, is just coming from the fact that those guys had, Richie Wise was in Dust. They were a hard rock band too. I think they knew exactly where they were trying to get.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. I think that's revisionist history on Paul's part. I think they were trying to capture it as tightly as they could. I think they were, I think that kind of speed back then was sort of foreign to music. Not a lot of groups played, and we're looking at things now with hindsight.
Right.
And people forget how crazy fast that first Ramones album sounded at the time.
Oh,
Listen to it now, it doesn't seem like it's fast because we know we've had thrash and hardcore and blah, blah, blah. But at the time, that kind of stuff, they were trying, I think, to pull out more of, like I said, a swagger, almost danceable kind of feel.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of the reason why, is because when they were charging along at full steam, like on those demos, it kind of pulled that ability, that danceable ability or whatever. I think they were probably very much thinking like that.
Yeah.
And
I guess just on this, it just didn't land, because I feel that there's a very danceable song on this record.
You think there is?
Yes.
Okay, well, have we got there?
No.
Oh, well, then we'll discuss it when we get there. But it plods. I think, some of these songs kind of plod. I think compared, when the Kiss Alive comes up a few years later, and that's more definitive versions of these songs. But, yeah, so...
Yeah, where's that land for you, Cap?
Same deal, bottom 3. That's just kind of one of those where it feels like, that's just a live song. That's one of those that didn't need to make a record per se, but it could have been a little faster. It's even the riff and the lyric still feels a little lazy to me.
As a Stanley, right?
It's him claiming he's rewriting a song called Fire Brigade by the group The Move. The Move were very influential on Paul Stanley's songwriting.
But at least he's up front about it. At least he didn't try.
He absolutely admits it, yeah. And I mean, if you listen to Fire Brigade, it doesn't sound to me anything like Firehouse, but I think it was just the generalized idea of fire fighting for your love. The lyric is a little. I mean, there's some clever lyrics in it, but just the concept Firehouse is kind of silly.
Sets my soul afire.
Again, great artist steal. So
good artist borrow. Personally, I like the song, but I think I don't know. It's still. It doesn't really rank with what they would eventually rise to.
I wouldn't introduce this to a new Kiss fan, if I was going to give them a gateway song.
Then after that, we've got Cold Gin, written by the one and only Ace Frehley.
This one I would show somebody new.
That song is, the bottom line is it's a great song. There's so much interesting stuff to point at on this one track. The fact that if you listen to it closely, you realize that they've really done some work as far as figuring out who's going to play what and how, because that's not one big riff. It's 3 different guys playing 3 complete different parts.
That bass line's
Gene's doing a
over the
little
place.
bass walk the entire time. Ace is doing a different chord progression.
What Ace is playing on guitar is not what Paul's playing on guitar, but it all melds together to make the one great big riff.
Yep.
So what you hear is, obviously the song, the ba 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 ba, but they're all playing different stuff, and that you realize how clever they really were as writers.
Mm-hmm. Speaking on the clever bit, the breakaway. Now that's Gene. Gene wrote that. He wrote that bit.
Yeah,
I can see that because
I like that bit.
I think he had it, and they just dropped it in there.
Well, yeah. Even the Ace riff, it'd be super easy for us as guitar players to play it, but it's also one of those where it's like, who the fuck comes up with that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I totally get it.
That time signature and everything.
I think it's one of the 2 best songs on the album, and I think it stands as a classic for a reason, because it's just, it's got a good dirty vocal off of Gene. It's just to me,
because he doesn't drink.
Well, yeah, but that's, you don't know that,
right?
You don't know anything about them at this point, and that's part of what makes it appealing in a way.
Yeah, I'd say I probably don't love it as much as you do, but everything else I would echo. I'd put it in my top 3. I just wouldn't say it's necessarily like a quintessential Kiss song, or like, top 3 or top 5 greatest even.
I think it's a quintessential Kiss song. I personally do. I think it's...
You can't not have that at a set. you know,
it's a great raunchy song. And,
Yeah.
You know, I think it's part of what makes this album as strong as it is.
Oh yeah, like I said, I definitely put it in my top 3. I just probably wouldn't love it.
I don't know if I put it in my top 3. That's tough. It's neck and neck with, you know, what I have in my top 3, you know.
Well, honestly, it's very easy for me. This next one is definitely in my top 3. Let me know.
I love this one
Stanley
too.
Wright. This is the one I say is fully danceable. I think this has a great groove to it. It kind of harkens back to almost a Beatles type vibe, even with Gene's little boom boom boo doom, you know, on his bass. I think this is probably my favorite track on the record next to Strutter.
I wish they would have done the version they would do on, you know, demos and stuff like that, as opposed to what they wound up with on the album with that big, and then you let me know.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, the demo goes on a lot longer with the whole extended, yeah.
I love that.
Well, I think that was also how they were doing it live, and I think they continued to do it live like that even after the album came out.
They did, yeah.
That coda that they put on it on the record, obviously they ended up putting on, different places at different parts. I guess I don't know.
I think they stacked it on at the end of Cold. She, yeah.
But I don't know that they were playing She at this point yet. So I don't know. You know, I don't know if they wrote that part intentionally for the album,
right?
You know, I don't know where that was being used at that time.
That's a good question. You don't see any info on that anymore.
You know what? I think it might have been Cold Gin, because I feel like that Winterland show comes out of Cold Gin.
Well, like I think they put it in different places at different times.
Yeah,
it was always before.
But to have it
solo.
recorded in that, you know, but it seems like a contrast to the song "Let Me Know." It's almost like
something way different.
It's all of a sudden they go into a left field thing, and it seems like an afterthought. It's kind of a sloppy transition. I mean, it's not sloppy. It's not done sloppily,
just
but
hard.
It's a weird transition to make at the end of a song like "Let Me Know," which, like you said, it's very poppy, you know. And I think it's important to note at this point just how important it is that they were more pop influenced. When I say pop, I mean like 60s
power pop.
The Beatles. They were much more Beatles than Black Sabbath.
And I think it shows on this song tremendously.
And it shows on this song, and I think it shows in the undercurrent of what they would continue to do as songwriters. You know, I never thought of Kiss as a quote-unquote heavy metal band.
I never did either.
They were a muscled-up pop band.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
I'd agree.
Pop on steroids. They were a hard rock band, and they were great at it. I don't say that as an insult at all.
No. Where does Let Me Know land for you, Captain?
It's definitely in my top 3. It's a great song, and again, I wish they would have done it the other way.
Do it the other way.
No, I love the bass line in it. I love the melodies in it. I love that it just kind of bounces, and it's not just like it's kind of like Strutter, where there's like a little bit of a walky, you know, bounced in the bass and things like that too, and the drums do, you know, are great with complementing it.
Something else I like about it that we don't get a lot in Kiss songs is a Gene and Paul dual vocal.
Yeah, there's only 3 or 4 songs like that.
Mm-hmm. And I like that contrast of like Gene doing a verse, Paul picking up a verse. It's pretty cool.
That's something they always did really well when they did do it.
Yeah, and like total side note, but semi on topic. I think the best one they ever did like that was fast forward way in the future. Their cover of Rock and Roll Radio. I thought that was really cool how like Gene and Paul kind of passed the verses back and forth. But yeah, so I thought that was cool. But then right after that, not on the initial pressing.
Yep.
But on the like quick second run, they quickly pushed out after they realized it wasn't selling very well.
Well, I don't think it had even so much to do with it wasn't selling well. They, you know, Neil Bogart was from
talking about Kissin' Time, of course.
Yeah, yes. The song Kissin' Time was Neil Bogart's idea. And they tied it into these kissing contests, which really they were trying to use. It had two purposes. And part of it was the idea was, this will help promote the Kiss album. But more importantly, they were trying to promote Casablanca.
Yeah. They were putting it on TV shows too.
They were using Kiss. I think the attitude was Kiss was probably almost a write-off. They were okay. Casablanca would have been okay to have Kiss fail if it meant it established Casablanca.
Yeah.
Now, what was going on as all this happened was, and this is very important to the history of the band, it was Casablanca was a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers had no faith in Kiss because, like I said, I think Mo Austin had already seen it and said, no, and issued a directive, and I think it's in writing, and this is how they got a hold of it, to not, to their rack jobbers is what they call these guys, not to push the Casablanca record because it's this Kiss record and we don't really think this is going to do anything. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, that didn't sit well with Neil Bogart, nor should it. So he was able to negotiate an out from the distribution, having Warner. So the earliest Kiss record, the first album, the earliest pressings of that is manufactured and distributed by Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
And those are kind of rare to find now, to find Warner Brother issued.
Actually, I was literally just turned around me. I was checking the wall, but I've still got an issue. I've actually still got a copy of the first album that you gave me. Yeah. That doesn't have Kissin' Time on it. You picked it up at a garage sale.
I've been lucky. I found several copies of that over the years. But yeah, the Kissin' Time was not on the original press of it. They added that as part of a means to help promote the record label. And it was a hackneyed idea. The band didn't like it, but they did it dutifully partly because what the hell were they going to do? Say no?
Right. And even though it's a cover, it is cool as hell that the first lyric in it is "Come on, Charlotte."
Yeah.
So hearing Paul yell "Come on, Charlotte," it's okay, that's cool.
I didn't recognize that as Charlotte for years. I thought he said Detroit.
Really?
But I guess he's saying Charlotte, which is our hometown where we're recording this from.
Very correct. Cap, where's it land for you?
Yeah, in my bottom three, just because of what it is, and
I don't hate it. I don't hate the song.
I don't hate it, but it's just kind of
the chorus is catchy as hell. Hearing Gina Paul go on that, whoa,
but it doesn't blend into that record to me. And it just sounds like it's just completely unnecessary. And I don't know. It was clever that they rewrote the words. It was clever that they thought, okay, well, this gives everybody another moment to shine. So
Peter sings
on it too. They should have probably given Peter a little more to do on that first record, I think.
He's got backups on Nothing to Lose, vocals on Kissin' Time, and then lyrics on Black Diamond.
Yeah, he does the vocal on Black Diamond. We'll get to that. So Kissin' Time is sort of like you could erase it from the record because at one point it wasn't even part of the record.
Exactly.
So it's
there.
Disposable track.
Well, right after that, we've got another Simmons write-up with Deuce.
Which is a quintessential.
Yeah.
I would put that one higher than Cold Gin as quintessential.
I think I don't like the album version of it because of that stuttered guitar. The way he plays it in the studio version. Whatever he's doing there. I didn't care for that. I like it when it's more direct, and I think it works better as a live track. But it's still a great song. It's completely nonsensical. I like that he's not even trying to make any sense out of a lyric.
No.
and that's, what does it all mean? It doesn't mean anything. And that's
I have a theory.
It doesn't, but your theory isn't any more valid or less valid than anyone else's. Right. Because I don't think he had a theory. I don't think he had an idea of what any of it meant.
Sometimes you just write a dumb song like that.
I think Gene was always about just anything that was outlandish or weird. Yeah. And if you listen to a lot of his early songs, it's all weird. None of it makes sense. Yeah, he was writing. So that's
Stanley the Parrot.
Yeah, where do you get these ideas? It was just weird. It was just the idea, weird. Yeah. And so it's got Gene's weird lyrics that mean absolutely nothing, but it's still just probably one of their great songs. It's easily probably in the top 5 of all of their entire catalog. It's just such a great song.
My favorite bit in it is, of course, the outro where they just keep rocking that riff over and over, and they do that sway side to side thing, which was a Sean Delaney bit.
Yeah, well, that's all.
But my theory on the lyrics, I think it's very straightforward, and I just don't think he wants to admit it. So think about it.
I know what you're gonna say.
Well, then what am I gonna say?
Go ahead. I'm gonna let you say it.
You drop a deuce. Okay, it's called taking a shit. You know your man is working hard. He's worth a deuce. He's worth a shit. Treat him right.
No, that wasn't what I was thinking.
I think that's where it comes from.
That'd be the theory I went with too. But that's
that's kind of where my brain immediately went. Like dropping a deuce, dropping a shit. You know your man's working hard. He's worth a shit.
I don't know.
That's what I always thought too. But
that's even cornier than what I thought.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
Hey. All right. Before this goes too far off
we
the
are
rails,
No Time to Turn a Kiss Nerd Podcast. You can hear us.
all right. After that, we got Love Theme from Kiss.
That is the most disposable, unnecessary, has no point. I don't understand why it existed ever on any level.
Because they were already
chopped
playing
the
it.
wrong part of the song.
Well, yeah, but even that.
Because I think Acrobat or whatever they wanted to call the demo or whatever.
The whole thing, yeah.
Yeah,
There's no demo of that.
No, it's just live clips.
Yeah.
But yeah, when Peter goes into that little jazz shuffle and they kind of do the bastardized Detroit Rock City riff and
Yeah.
And how much to love, you must to
I don't even think that's all that great, but
I thought it's cool.
You know, I don't understand why this even exists. It's filler, and it's obvious filler. There's no point for that to be on the record. I think they probably could have came up with something better, and I don't know, time or just effort or
but
whatever.
We're not the authority on
We're not the authority, but I'm just saying it's. I've never understood it.
I don't hate it though. You know, it's like as a musical piece, I don't hate it, but
well, explain it real quick because I'm not really in love with it. So what draws you into it?
The guitar playing, being in love with guitar sounds and stuff like that. I love it, but Russ is absolutely right.
I'll do the devil's advocate bit for you since we banter a good bit. We can do this a little. I feel the guitar riff is very repetitive and monotonous. Like after the first 45 seconds, I'm like, cool, I got it.
It is. And the point I was going to make is that Russ is absolutely right. It is filler, but it's still cool to listen to for a couple minutes. It's kind of like the coda at the end of Let Me Know. It feels like they crammed all of their ideas they had at the time into this record, and try to document it.
Well, obviously it didn't because there was a lot more to that song that they cut out.
Yeah.
So you're right. It would seem a little backwards that they would have the more up-tempo rock song as to do it. I don't know whose idea that was. That could have been a Kenny Kerner or Richie Wise idea. Use that part. And it's also interesting to note, I think it might be the only song in the entire Kiss catalog that is credited to all four individual members.
I think you're right.
Yeah, right here.
Which I don't know if that says something positive or negative.
I was going to say, you don't see a lot of Peter Criss co-writes.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Then right after that, I feel like we're all kind of in agreement on that one. After that, we got 100,000 Years, a Stanley Simmons right.
I love that song.
I do too.
I think it's a quintessential Kiss song.
I do love this one.
I think it's I think it's based on a Gene idea, but I think it's all Paul basically that wrote the whole thing. I think Gene had maybe the line.
It sounds like some Gene lyrics.
I've read
futuristic.
I've read some stuff about them talking about it, and Paul seems to kind of claim the whole ownership of it, but I think
that's also a very Paul thing to do.
Yeah, so I don't know, but it's such a badass song. There's just it's got a weird lyric. It's kind of like what are they talking about? It doesn't matter,
Yeah.
It's just if looking at it now, it kind of feels like they were kind of going for that kind of spacey Bowie kind of idea as far as traveling time or whatever the fuck it is, but it's still just a badass raunchy. And to me, it's got that feels like what Kiss is to me. That whole song, and to me, I think you could play that song cold to someone that never listened to Kiss at all and win them over on that.
I think so.
The guitar riffs in it and the solo, especially the solo they come back into, because Ace does one solo and then it goes to the little drum breakdown with Paul on top of sorry to have taken so long. And when they bust back into it and Ace finishes up his solo, oh my god, like that is like, it gives me chills just because it's that little harmony walk up he does, that
it's fun to hear, like when they did the reunion and Ace was talking about having to relearn that stuff and how he's like, how did I write that?
Because it's totally spacey and awesome.
It's really cool stuff. I think that's in a easy top 5 probably of all time Kiss songs.
Same here. That used to be my favorite.
We're going to say this, and I'm going to end up with like 15 top 5 all time.
Right.
By the time we get to the end of this whole run, but
well, we wouldn't be Kiss nerds if that wasn't the case.
That used to be my favorite tabletop drum beat.
Oh yeah.
Just kind of like just tapping, just as a nervous habit or whatever.
All right, then wrapping up the record is Black Diamond, a solo Stanley Wright. We got Peter singing on this one.
Yeah, I guess they had to give Peter something to do.
They
should have given. Well, maybe he was. I don't know, but they should have given him more to do because his voice was so. That voice worked. They talked about him being
nothing but negative things to say about his voice. Like even straight up, like he couldn't carry a tune if it was in a bucket type shit.
I don't. That's. There might be an element of truth to that, but there's also a sizable element of probably professional jealousy because Peter's voice was so kind of unique. He had that raspy, and it was really a secret weapon that they had, and they could use it. It was there when they needed it, and they needed it for a song like Black Diamond. Honestly, I don't think that any of them could have done that as well as Peter had.
I know. I was picturing Paul or Gene singing that now, and just kind of, it would feel weird.
Oh, there's other points where I could see Peter. Maybe they could have used him. I think he could have done a good vocal and Let Me Know.
Yeah,
I think that would have suited his style very well.
Totally.
I love
but they probably didn't want that because they wanted to have the whole Paul and John kind of Beatles harmony kind of going, and they're like, oh, Peter and his raspy voice probably couldn't do it.
They had the idea that all 4 were going to be individual. They were modeling themselves consciously on the Beatles, and as much as they wanted each guy to have individual character and an individual voice on each record. Ace wasn't singing at that point. Ace wrote.
He just chose not to, though, right?
He chose not to. I don't think he felt confident enough to sing, which is understandable.
You're like, I'm not going to say anything about that.
I'm not. No, I'm saying if you don't feel confident, I think Ace had a good voice. I think he had a good rock and roll voice. But
it took him a while to get comfortable with it.
He had to get comfortable enough to do it. What's interesting about the song, though, is how again, this is a recorded version versus the live version.
Yeah.
It just plods. It doesn't, that song really needed that speed and that immediacy and urgency that it had in the live,
kind of like Firehouse.
But on the record, it just sort of plods. And then to make it worse at the end, they do those long droning notes. And that's just filler. That seems like that's just to fill space on a record.
Yeah, because the total length of the record is 35 minutes, 11 seconds.
It just makes me think of like, you ever listen to like James Brown tracks where he's just like, playing with his band and it's supposed to be their live set or whatever, but it's just them in a studio, so it just feels awkward. James like, can I get yada yada over here? Yeah. It's like, James, we're in a fucking studio. There's nobody here.
Well, it's a different thing with a different vibe. The Kiss thing needed that kind of immediacy, like bring it up a little bit. They should have sped it up. It really drags. You can tell, and maybe you wouldn't be able to tell or even think about it if they didn't have the live album to contrast it to.
I love Black Diamond, though.
Well, I love the song.
That is like seriously
trust me, it's a great song.
Oh yeah.
I think the idea behind that was the subject matter is that it's supposed to be about a prostitute.
Yeah.
And, that was kind of a cool kind of idea. And, it was bringing in some shade of darkness that they wouldn't normally go to. Certainly by the late 70s, they would never write a song like that in 1979.
But this is also early 70s in New York, and they were all hanging out at those spots too.
It's very completely a New York thing.
And actually, with it being a Stanley Wright, he was a cab driver at the time, so he probably saw a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
no doubt.
You talking to me?
Yeah. And
Paul Stanley, you talking to me?
And honestly,
I don't see anyone else here.
That was good.
That was. We ought to, for when we do Higher Than Hell, we ought to do this part before we go into the track listing. But let's talk about the album cover.
Right. Now, there's a lot of different stories about that.
What's the story that you tend to lean on?
What I think the true story is?
Yeah.
I believe the photographer is named Joel Brodsky.
Yes.
And he did the Doors, was it the...
So you get the famous Jim Morrison, spread arm.
I don't know if he did
shot.
Morrison Hotel or not. But anyway,
yeah,
he had done, he was a noted photographer. They had him come in. The story that sometimes the band tells is that he showed up with balloons.
Yeah.
Saying, "You're clowns, right? Here's the balloons." And I don't think, and he says that wasn't true. And I agree. I don't think he had that idea. They had hired a professional makeup artist to help them apply their makeup, which is why Peter all of a sudden has this ornate makeup design that he never
do you know the origins
used ever.
Of that?
The makeup?
Yeah. So that actually did have a very interesting origin that someone from the KISS FAQ message board dug up maybe about, I want to say almost maybe 8 years ago at this point.
We know this is factual, or is this just something that came up on a message board?
I feel like by the time I finish explaining, it's pretty factual.
Okay, lay it on us.
So someone was able to find a Halloween mask dated in the mid-'60s that was supposed to be a tiger mask. And it had the red triangle on the chin, the sectioned off whiskers. The only thing that was really different was the eyes. And now people are kind of truly believing it's like that this mask may have been the partial inspiration from that, because they always talk about the kabuki masks and this, that, and the other. I feel like that may have been a partial inspiration from that makeup artist. Like she brought that in and was like,
it may
let's
not even
do
brought
this.
it in. I could see them maybe having had it at some point and remembering it, going, "Oh, I remember I used to have this mask that had this," and just did it. But that's the only time he ever had that makeup design, and it was for their debut album, which was like not a good idea. But then, they want to, and that's one of the things they speak negatively on Peter about for some reason. But really, if you look, all their makeup designs are kind of still in
beta stages.
Yeah.
Jeans always change.
Jeans changed a lot. So, the point was obviously they were doing a playoff of Meet the Beatles.
Right.
Which I'm sure was a very conscious decision, a very conscious and deliberate decision. I think it's interesting to note that Ace has spray painted his hair silver.
Yeah,
and he didn't dye his hair silver. He spray painted his hair silver
to try to impress the guys
in true Ace fashion.
Which is just, come on. What do you say to that?
The story I've always read with like the makeup though is that everybody else applied their own makeup except Peter, but that just sounds like another excuse to shit on Peter for no good reason.
But they may be true. I don't know.
I was gonna say that was part of the story I've also
But
heard.
if you notice, they've also painted their necks, which that's the only time you ever see that. So that's you've got this oddball visual, but I think. Now going back to the competition between them and the Dolls, they both got very unique, stylized album covers, both which the Dolls never looked like that as they do on that album cover. They never dressed in full drag ever.
No.
And, they kind of are on that first album. They never looked like that before or after, really, not extreme. Kiss never really looked like they do on that album cover either, but the Kiss thing was probably a little more easily digestible than the Dolls album cover was. It was a lot less threatening. It was still a curiosity. It was like, what is this? But it didn't seem as threatening, which is ironic because Kiss were trying to be a lot more menacing than the Dolls. But the Dolls were a lot more menacing just by the sheer,
just because they naturally were, and the folks they hung out with.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying that album cover just looks a lot more... and dangerous.
Let me ask you this.
Kiss album.
With us being kind of Kiss nerds and us even kind of looking at Peter's makeup going, he never did this again outside of this. How would we feel seeing it rewrite history? Would we like the album cover with his actual makeup design?
Yeah, I'm sure we wouldn't know any different.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
You know, the only reason why it stands off as being different is because it is different, and that's the only time he ever did it. Now, if it was something that was short-lived, that he continued to do for a while, it's sort of like the right at that same time, and I want to say this was a Neil Bogart idea. He persuaded Paul into changing his makeup design.
Yeah, to the Bandit.
What they call it, the Bandit. I don't know that it had that name.
Yeah.
I don't know who came up with that name. I don't think they even had names for their individual characters per se at that point.
Right.
But yeah, that makeup design, which is a cool makeup design. Mm-hmm. But what was it? What was he? As Kiss developed into quote unquote characters, what would that persona have been? Like I think
he kind of talked about it on the Tom Snyder interview where he was like, he's like always wanted to be like the Lone Ranger kind of thing.
So that kind of fits in a way, but
I'm the Lone Bandit.
Yeah, yeah, standing on the Long Island Expressway with wind blowing through my hair.
I hold silver.
So it just goes to show that there's still, all of them are still in flux. They're still developing the whole concept. But now everything is at a heightened sense of importance because they have gotten signed and they are issuing promo material, and now this is the band. But it does kind of call into question, if Paul was willing to change his makeup that radically, what would it have been if they had changed their makeup kind of sporadically as they progressed, like to the point where, the design's completely changed?
I feel like that probably actually wouldn't have even been an option at any point, because I feel like I remember Paul not liking his design.
He claims he didn't like it, and that's why he reverted back to the Star.
Yeah. So I feel like maybe they kind of got attached to the alter egos and didn't want to deviate too far. But I'm wondering if that was even ever considered a possibility, that they could, completely change designs fluidly as the mood sought, and I think if they had, I'm not saying they did, but I don't think that it would have had that impact. I think keeping it the same, is, even if it's a slightly different, slightly different, but keeping it the same, kept them all with an identifiable persona. It locked everything into a much more rigid,
identity
standard. Yeah. So that all worked to their advantage. I think they, changed it a lot, because I think that's something that probably hurt the Dolls, was that their image kind of altered a little bit as they kind of kept going. It was never really the same thing. They didn't dress the same every photo shoot was a different thing.
And it was the red leather era and all that with Malcolm McLaren.
Right. So they never held an identifiable kind of thing. Like even Alice, I think Alice's thing locked in once he did the Harlequin thing. He went from the spider eyes to the Harlequin thing, and it worked a lot better once he hit that Harlequin. Never has changed since, because that's Alice Cooper. And the same with Kiss. So they all that is happening all at the same time, but by this point you got them, like you said, they hit the road in early February and do the Canada tour, and I think that was as a last minute substitution for Michael Quattro.
And like I said, I just thought it was utterly fascinating that like literally on the same day, March 29th, 74, the ABC's In Concert and Mike Douglas show aired.
See, is that they got them both airing the same day?
Yeah, to pull out a full quote here, a few weeks later, they made their first national TV appearance on ABC's In Concert, aired March 29th, 1974, performing Nothing to Lose, Firehouse, and Black Diamond, followed by a performance of Firehouse on the Mike Douglas show, also aired March 29th, 1974.
That's interesting.
Part of the fun with doing this is going on YouTube and finding these performances, especially the Mike Douglas interview.
Well, I think, you look at that, and I think watching those performances, you see how they're getting to where they're going, but they're a little unrefined. They're still playing more to the speed of the record. Right. It's almost like they're mimicking the record. They've gone away from what the demo was, which I imagine was what they were going into recording the record, and now they're changed to reflect what is on the record so people know what they're going to get when they buy it. So those songs still sound like a little bit, and they altered when they did the ABC's In Concert, they came away with it with a kind of a negative take on it, saying they didn't feel like it was exciting enough, and they tried to add these kind of weird special effects.
Yeah, those fireworks that are like, in the background.
To try to liven it up a little bit.
And also to even further instate what you're talking about with the fast transition of going into the studio with the demo sound and now having to, only a few weeks later, now have to play the album sound. Right here at the very top, I'm surprised we didn't even mention this when we started it. Richie Wise stated that the recording, mixing, and mastering took 13 days.
Jesus.
Yeah. Imagine doing all of that in 13. All of us have been in studios in different styles. Imagine doing all of that in 13 days.
Yeah.
Cocaine in the 70s, baby.
Well, I doubt that was much in play at that point. And certainly not for
Casablanca yet.
Well, Casablanca would become quite the drug-fueled operation.
That was after Alive, so we've got a couple more episodes before we get to there.
But them going now just into going out on the road as a live act, and now getting their early promotional appearances, like we said, the ABCN concert, the Mike Douglas show, where he famously got skewered by Toady Fields.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be funny if he was just a nice Jewish boy underneath that makeup?
You can't hide the hook, is what she says.
Yeah, Jesus, like, you should only know. Just very
She's
sheepishly.
like, oh, I know. She's like, I know.
You can't hide the hook.
But what makes that work, I think, and we look at it now and laugh because we're laughing at them. But I think if I were a kid tuning in and seeing that, after school one day, and I would think, that old lady's out of touch because that guy's cool. I think that probably cemented a certain as their fan base is growing. They're something that's different. It's outlandish, and that old lady's out of touch.
Yeah, she's like visibly rolling her eyes and opening her mouth.
So in hindsight, we go, oh, he looks stupid, and probably to a certain segment of the audience at that time, he looks stupid. But for another segment of the audience, she looks stupid for having going there.
And honestly, in retrospect, I feel like he played it off very well, because think about it. You're Gene Simmons, and he's discussed already before that they were like, who's going to go out there and talk? And he's like, I guess I am. He wasn't really prepared to do it. And they've already been coached by Bill with the whole keep your identity secret. So he's really trying to be a character, talking about biting the necks of audience members, all of that. Top,
though, but
then all of a sudden she goes, wouldn't it be nice if he was a little Jewish boy underneath that makeup? All of a sudden you got to think, he's not prepared for this in the slightest. That probably broke him down immediately. And for the fact that she was just like, you can't hide the hook. He just started kind of just scrunching his nose up at her and giggled and moved on. I thought he actually navigated that extremely well.
And then they plugged that kiss contest that we were talking about earlier.
And then that was over by then. Those were the people that won it.
Yeah.
So and then
they're like supposed to win a cruise and some shit, and then they're supposed to go to a Kiss concert, and they're like, we're just going to send you on a cruise instead.
I don't remember what the winning was, but I mean,
it was a Kiss concert in Canada, but then that had to get canceled, and then they were trying to pitch that cruise or whatever it was instead.
So, but they go on and they continue to tour. They're opening for other groups, famously getting kicked off of tours. There's a lot of apocryphal stories as to whether or not you want to believe them or not, but some of it seems believable because apparently their road crew were some pretty nefarious types. Mm-hmm.
It's road crew in the 70s. What are you going to do?
Well, no, they were not just a road crew in the 70s. They were the Kiss road crew. They were very protective. It was like, close the ranks, and these guys believed in it and were ready to fight for it, and in ugly ways, because their reputation as a road crew spread to other road crews. Like, have you heard about Kiss? It was, have you heard about this group Kiss? Their road crew's insane.
No shit. I haven't heard any stories about that.
There's been a bunch of fun Kiss podcasts and like episodes and like YouTube things of like the road crew telling old stories of that back in the day, and I don't remember names. These
guys wore studded leather just like the band did. I mean, they looked like, it was like, oh, here's the band. No, that's the road crew.
Yeah.
That was literally the perception. They would show up and people were like, oh, I guess that must be Kiss. No, that's the road crew.
Yeah.
The Hell's Angels at Altamont's
kind of. I mean,
security.
yeah.
Mix that with a bunch of pyromaniacs.
Oh God.
and they were just a group of tough New York guys that were good. They needed that because they were being backed up. There was some. Well, we skipped over the premiere launch party for Casablanca, also in February of '74, and that went over like a fart in a spacesuit. the launch party was successful for Casablanca, but as a launch for Kiss, who played at this thing. But there was a lot of important industry people there, notably Alice Cooper, who famously quipped, "Well, they're good, but what they need is a gimmick." Hardy, har, har, har.
Well, didn't Warner Brothers drop Casablanca after seeing Kiss and then
they were still with Warner at that point, I think. But yeah, we just discussed that a little while ago. That was it was somewhere in that time frame where all that kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Let's see who else was at that thing, because that was kind of an important thing for them to do. Like I said, it didn't go over as well as they hoped, but Burton Cummings from Guess Who was there, and I think he was really put off by it.
I was gonna say, if you wanted to look up the rest of the guests, I actually have some of the sales figures talking about not so impressive.
Well, I mean, but as a new band out of the chute, and they're now not only do they not have a distribution deal, they're having to Neil Bogart's having to go work up every favor and friendship and every little back channel he can to shoestring together manufacturing and distribution deals. And that's, so it was going to be hard for them to even sell anything when there was hardly probably anything being produced to sell. So, Casablanca were in it now. They were up against the wall. And what they're banking on is this group Kiss. So they're kind of in this symbiotic relationship. The success of Casablanca depended on the success of Kiss that depended on the success of Casablanca.
Yeah.
And they sold 75,000 copies.
The odds are against them bad.
Yeah.
Big time bad. So, this is doomed to failure. It should not succeed. And the industry is watching. They're keenly aware that this is happening, I'm sure, but they're watching with laughter and like this. Look at this. This is what music business has been reduced to. Well, watch, it's going to fail.
They wear the biggest point of contingency with anything you read is because they wear makeup.
Yeah, I've seen the one thing they were listening. Same thing we talked about last episode. They're listening with their eyes and not with their ears.
Yeah, and I also, the album I still don't think plays to Kiss's strength. I don't think that it's matching the impact of the visual. I know people even now that say, one of their hangups with Kiss is that they look one way and sound another.
Yeah,
but I don't see it that way because I come from an era when it was all. It's all Kiss.
Yeah, it's all
but
part
I could
of the package.
see also other people saying that at the time. I don't think that album was a very strong statement coming out of the chute. I think
agree with
especially
that.
comparing it to the demo.
Yeah, and I think that so it's almost like they didn't blow up on the launch pad, but they barely got up into the air, but they did.
Yeah,
and now they're really going to have to prove it. And how are they going to prove it? Playing live. And and now they're out on the road for the first time ever, and their show is going to obviously continuously get refined. Now, obviously, we also skipped over the New Year's Eve show.
Well, what I was going to ask is, so we've pretty much wrapped up conversation on the first record. For the next episode, do we want to go ahead and talk about first tour, or do we want to do Hotter Than Hell?
Well, we'll do a little both. We'll go into Hotter Than Hell. But I'd like to close with just another. It's important to talk about in this episode, I think, with that New Year's Eve show. They're for all intents and purposes. I mean, they've been playing shows around New York. They get added to this show at the Academy of Music, which is the biggest show they had done so far at that point. And famously, Gene caught his hair on fire, blowing fire for the first time.
Right.
And Sean Delaney put it out, and no one, people thought it was part of the show.
Yeah.
But they, there was 2 sets played that night, and Kiss only played on, I think, the first one. They were unannounced, and it was almost like they were tacked on as a favor.
Yeah.
And that show's gone down into history as a legendary gig, largely just because of all the other bands that were involved that kind of got eclipsed by their opening band over time, which included Iggy and the Stooges and Blue Oyster Cult.
Yeah.
And both are great bands in their own individual ways. I love both of them. But who would have thought going in that night seeing Kiss and thinking out of all these groups, in the big opening act that was being ballyhooed at the time was the Harlots. I think were on that.
Okay.
So Kiss got thrown on almost as a favor. And then you start seeing as they go through their first tour, a lot of what they're doing is getting favors called in. And so I think it's important to say that right now they're primed not for success, but for failure. This first album is, nowadays we look at it with hindsight. It's it's the first Kiss album. It's a great album. It's classic, blah, 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 blah. But at the time, I think it probably came out as like anticlimactic.
Yeah.
I can see
they're
that.
struggling, and they're struggling bad. There's no money. And
Can't get a break anywhere.
Their record company is like probably not going to survive. All of this is probably going to go under. So we're kind of reaching a cliffhanger ending here going into the next one. It's not looking good.
So after that, we've got Hotter Than Hell.
We'll discuss that on the next episode of No Time to Turn. And want to thank everyone for joining in. And for Cap Nunn and Alex Stiff, I'm Russ Ward, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Please insert another coin by supporting the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/somethinggoodnetwork.